Next team you have listed here is the Carolina Panthers. By the way, the Cardinals were the first team that does not have a first contract quarterback that made our list here. The rest of these teams, Bears and Patriots, certainly do, and the Panthers do as well with Bryce Young. So they had money to spend. They had okay draft capital. They were still dealing with the Bryce Young trade, so they were missing a second rounder, but they got one back from the Rams from last year, so it wasn't too bad. But the Panthers, adding a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball, then going with Tetairoa McMillan at pick 8. Love the way they worked the draft, getting McMillan, and then the two edge rushers, Princely Umanmielen and Nick Scorton later in the draft. So Panthers appear to be much improved, particularly on that defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, we loved their draft. Their free agency was interesting because they were another team, that came into the offseason with some money to spend, with some clear needs and a desperate need to upgrade, particularly the defense. And they were in on the Milton Williams sweepstakes, et cetera. They thought they had a deal done, and the Patriots came in with basically more money, and Carolina had to pivot, and they had to go in a different direction. And then they started to bring in guys like Tershawn Wharton from Kansas City as a backup plan, Patrick Jones from the Vikings. So they had an interesting offseason because it's not the one I think that they would have wanted to have if they had, optimal, here's your money, here's your free agent targets, who are you bringing in? I mean, clearly they wanted Milton Williams as the big sort of marquee signing and didn't get it done. And I think, look, that's not to say it was a failure. They had a financial line in the sand. This is like part of how you build teams, right? Is you assign a value to each individual player, and once the bidding goes above that value, it's no longer worth bringing that guy in, or at least that's the debate you need to have, right? How much more, like at an auction, how much higher than what you want to pay is still worth it to get the thing you want? Evidently, they decided where that money was going was beyond where they were willing to pay for a guy like Milton Williams. We're going to pivot. We're going to distribute the money to Wharton, to Pat Jones, to other players as well, and hopefully, recreate Milton Williams in the aggregate with the Moneyball meme. So it was an interesting. I think they did upgrade, not in the way they necessarily wanted to do it, but then they came back in the draft and really hammered that defensive line with their draft picks after the first round pick. But spending on the defensive line in particular in free agency allowed them to use that first round pick on Tetairoa McMillan instead of needing to bring in a Walter Nolan or a pass rusher with that first top 10 pick. The spending spree that they went on in free agency at least gave them the freedom to say, no, we're going to use the first rounder. We're going to take a wide receiver, and then we can come back in the second and the third round for defensive ends.
Yeah. So to be fair here, I didn't love. Look, I came out of free agency saying Tershawn Wharton's a nice player. Is he worth $15 million? I don't know, 15 per year. Bobby Brown III, Pat Jones, who you mentioned. I mean, I didn't feel great about that coming out. But then when you add the two edge rushers, I might be swayed by, like, they're throwing bodies at the situation. I might be swayed by the volume attempt here. So 3, I don't want to say big signings in free agency, but as you mentioned, the aggregate of the Milton Williams money. So that's a thought experiment that interested to see how that plays out. Would they rather have one Milton Williams or because it almost adds up. Tershawn Wharton plus Bobby Brown plus Pat Jones almost equals one Milton Williams. Right. So it's 3 bodies versus 1, which when we always talk about trade down in the draft, you get 3 players instead of 1, like it's the free agent equivalent. And then but I love the way they worked the draft to get Princely Umanmielen and Nick Scorton. Now you add them to the mix with Jadeveon Clowney and DJ Wanham. There's at least some potential and some hope there rushing the passer. Don't forget they get Derek Brown back. Missed him. He only played 40-something snaps or whatever it was last year, right? So that's a big thing where this defensive front looks much better in Carolina. And then you add the Tetairoa McMillan thing, right, where we preach take the best player available. We could debate if he's the actual best player, but clearly there was a thought process that we don't have to draft a defensive player despite all these first-round edge rushers on the board. So now you add McMillan, who I think eventually, I think he becomes Bryce Young's top target very soon. Very soon. I mean, maybe it's a year because Adam Thielen's still there, and Thielen's talking about being at the end of his career, and the dude can still play well enough, out of the slot as a high-volume receiver. I think McMillan, within a year, becomes the top option. We get to see if Lee Gett becomes the deep threat, and if they could get something out of Jalen Coker, Jimmy Horn Jr. as that next receiver. So it just sets them up with targets for Bryce Young.
All right, that's enough of that, Steve. Over 50% of the people listening to this are not subscribed right now. So click that button and then we can get back to whatever it is Steve's telling you about. I swear to God, the older we get, the more I lean like dinosaur boomer thought process with team building stuff. Like we've talked about a few different situations, like conservative thought with a small c, right? Like the more, usually I would think, I love what the Panthers did. Like once the price tag goes beyond a certain point, and this is true with the Kirk Cousins thing in Minnesota, like you should be assigning, a rough dollar figure to each individual player based off how good he is, what impact he makes, the war or whatever you want to, however you want to calculate value. This is what he's bringing to the table in a given season, in a given contract. This is what we think that is worth in terms of dollar amounts. And once the bidding goes above that, or once the contract demands go above that, you're like, we're going to walk away because you're not worth more than that. And that is therefore, even if it's only in the margins, it's harming the team, right? We're now getting not surplus value. We're getting like, what's the opposite of that? Negative value relative to negative surplus value.
Negative surplus. Yeah.
Right. Relative to what you're bringing to the table. So from a process standpoint, I think that's really sound and it's good fundamental thinking. But I do worry that like in a closed market, so that analogy I gave with the bidding thing, the auction, right? You go to an auction, like I really want whatever this is, this car. And I'd like, this is what this car is worth. Once the bidding goes above this, I'm out. I'm walking away from the auction. Somebody else can buy it. You can do that because there's another one coming up next week. And there's another one, it's going to be available down the line. And you can just get the car some other time, right? For the price you want it, because that's what it's worth. You can't necessarily do that in the NFL where there is a closed market and there's only X number of these guys. So if you need a Milton Williams and you happen to need him, this year when he's available and this is the market, once the price tag goes above the price you want to pay for it, your choices become you either overpay for Milton Williams or you don't get the thing that you need in order to, upgrade that part of the defense. And even if you take the money and you throw it at Tershawn, Wharton, and Pat Jones and blah, 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 there's a fairly healthy chance that even those three guys combined do not equal Milton Williams. So that this is what the NFL has always thought, just intuitively, right? Just spend spend what you need to get Albert Haynesworth in the building, right? That's been the thought process for decades. And the kind of new wave of, intellectual, analytical thinking has always been, well, let's push the value thing. But and I was all on board. I was riding that wave along with everybody else, right? But the more I think about it, the more I do think that there's like a rational argument to be like, yeah, but
just
you
pay
need
the
this
money.
guy. You might have to just overpay sometimes.
Well, yeah, because there's limited players available. There's also limited snaps on the defensive line. So if you're saying, well, Pat Jones, like last year, Pat Jones rushed the passer 315 times for Minnesota, had a PFF pass rush grade of 50. I mean, like we're saying, like on paper, we're saying, hey, they threw a lot of bodies at this, but there's not like a history of Pat Jones rushing the passer at a high level that he's going to help. But that's why they drafted the two players, right? So yeah, it is the other thing I'll add, it's a difficult problem to solve, right? Because it's also, we're talking about this offseason. Obviously, a team like the Panthers or the Patriots, any team is going to be thinking more than 1 year, right? This has to be a 2 to 3 year build here. And you literally can't solve every problem in one offseason. And you can't always solve it with one player, right? So if the next player who's 90% of Milton Williams is available next year, the Panthers might have to go spend 22, 23 million for him. And that might be worth it because I still think they need impact players on the defensive line. I just like that they've, I think, moved in the right direction there and then went with McMillan where they did in the draft.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.